Number 10. Jason Todd's worst fear. Probably one of the most heartbreaking moments for me in recent years in terms of DC Comics happened during Three Jokers, Batman Three Jokers, so pretty recently. I'm still not really sure why people don't like this comic. I thought the story by Jeff Johns and artist Jason Fabok was well worth the multi-year wait myself. It was suspenseful, it was mysterious, and it was just stunning. And honestly, every time I go back to it, I find something new that I like about it. Sure, the middle act in issue number 2 lagged a bit, but otherwise this comic to me was pretty flawless, other than a few minor plot hole issues in my opinion. Also the raccoon. And despite the lag in issue number 2, it still had one of the most heartbreaking moments for me, which occurred when Jason as Red Hood chose to strike out on his own and ended up finding a pool filled with failed attempts at creating the next Joker, which in and of itself is another kind of brutal. At one point the Three Jokers implied that Jason actually might be the best candidate to become the next Joker, but decide that he's simply not smart enough to take up the mantle. Ouch. Instead, they once more beat him to within an inch of his life with a crowbar, with one of the Jokers, implied to be the Joker who first did this to Jason way back when, commenting on how the second time was even more fun than the first. It gets especially brutal and heart-wrenching when Batgirl and Batman arrive on the scene to rescue him and he lashes out at them. Especially when like Babs just comes in and gives him a hug and she's like, I just want to make sure you're safe.
Number 9. The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Batman The Dark Knight Returns came to us originally as a way to give Batman, Bruce Wayne, a fitting end, and it's easily one of the greatest Batman stories out there, with Frank Miller art that was actually understandable and a great tale that wrapped up the character of Batman in a lovely little bow. But then, Frank Miller went and created 2 sequels, and the first of which is basically a fever dream of insanity, overly objectified blocky cartoon women, and just odd visuals, while also taking the character of Superman and completely misunderstanding and disrespecting him. But I think the most egregious moment came when Supes and the third member of the Trinity, Wonder Woman, decided they were going to hook up, right after Batman beat the absolute snot out of the Man of Steel. Wonder Woman comes in to find Superman completely beaten and bloody and ranting about how it's all over, and then, after punching him for being weak, I guess, they immediately start making out. Then they fly up into the stratosphere and begin going at it midair, and then slamming into the ground, causing volcanic eruptions, massive earthquakes, and tsunamis, hurricane-level winds, all for Wonder Woman to say he moved the earth for her. Wow, so poetic. And then she exclaims she is pregnant now, and they decide to get a bite to eat, but they sure are heroic.
And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button? Helps us out, helps you to stay in the know, it's a win-win.
Click the subscribe button!
Do it!
God!
Number 8. Jason Todd loves Barbara Gordon. Another really brutal moment, possibly one of my least favorite parts, I think, of Three Jokers, comes at the end. After taking Jason in and helping him to recover after he was attacked, Jason at one point attempts to kiss Barbara. This kind of makes a little bit of sense because, you know, they've got shared trauma, but this felt weirdly forced still and out of place to me because, you know, Babs still seems like she's kind of trying to be there for Jason like a sister. Like, I get that Jason is reaching out because for years he's felt like he was left behind, abandoned, and you know, like I said, they do have shared trauma, but Babs and Jason's relationship has always felt more platonic to me. And if anything, more than that, more familial. Like they were truly, you know, brother and sister. And when Babs reaches out, it's very clear she's coming from this place, and yet Jason seems to struggle to read the room and acts on his romantic feelings anyways, if that's even what's really going on for him. Honestly, I think he's just confused. The third issue ends with a kind of weird note with Jason leaves on our apartment door, and that ends up falling off and then being swept away by the building's janitor, which is especially weird and kind of cringe because it seems to imply, like that whole sequence of shots, that if Babs found it, things may have been different between them. Other than Barbara having to once more reaffirm her boundaries with Jason, I don't see how it could have ended otherwise. What a strange romance subplot that I never expected nor ever really wanted. But hey, there it is.
In its 7, Chewing Gum. The Justice Buster Batsuit is a mech suit that's part of Batman's Fenrir contingency, which is designed to take down the entirety of the Justice League if they were to turn bad. Making its feature appearance in Batman Endgame, when the Joker used his virus to warp the brains of the Justice League at the beginning of this Endgame plot, Batman was forced to use the Fenrir protocol to eliminate the teammates, or well, to at least subdue them. The suit was successful in eliminating Wonder Woman Woman, The Flash, and Aquaman, but men even matched the hands of Superman. After a lengthy fight, Superman tore through the armor and nearly killed Batman until Bruce used kryptonite chewing gum to spit in Clark's face, rendering him unconscious. Come on, okay? Imagine waking up to learn that you passed out because Batman spit on your face. Seriously, please, brush your tongue, okay? You get one of those tongue scrapers. Your breath is lethal. Not to mention the miniaturized red suns for Knuckles, they didn't help. You had to spit kryptonite chewing gum.
Number 6. Ethyl chloride. Ethyl chloride, a common compound found in pesticides and bug sprays, is essentially Spider-Man's kryptonite, and it severely impairs his senses. This makes ethyl chloride extremely powerful against Spider-Man. It's one of his biggest weaknesses, but yet ethyl chloride isn't being used by all of his villains all the time, even though it's actually a very common compound. The big reason why it doesn't show up much is that ethyl chloride is considered to be so supremely powerful against Spider-Man that there was a momentary ban placed on the substance by Marvel writers. It was literally becoming too easy to bring down Spidey, so writers got lazy and used it as a crutch just way too many times. Amazing Spider-Man number 106 has Spider-Man engaging in battle with the Spider Slayer Mark IV, which had the villainous edition of ethyl chloride. After trapping Spider-Man in a web, Smythe, the guy who created it, uses his machine to douse Peter with a cloud of the compound, and Spider-Man is weakened by the spray and finds himself unable to move, giving his enemies the chance to strike.
Halfway through into number 5, breathing. If I said Batman vs. Hulk, I think we should all agree, unless you're in denial, on the outcome, right? Talk about a one-sided fight. Batman standing up to Superman is one thing, they share a universe, he can get kryptonite, whatever. But Batman and the Hulk? No. Unfortunately though, they have gone toe-to-toe, and surprisingly, Batman achieved the impossible feat of defeating Hulk. In the harmonious days of 1981, when DC and Marvel were on friendly terms and the concept of separate universes hadn't really come to fruition, they occasionally collaborated on crossover stories. One such amusing tale unfolded in DC's Special Series number 27, written by the late Len Wein and illustrated by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. In the extraordinary encounter, Batman unexpectedly crossed paths with a rampaging Hulk, manipulated by the Joker to view Batman as a villain. The Hulk turned his fury towards the Caped Crusader, and Batman, recognizing the immense power of his opponent, somehow skillfully evaded Hulk's fists with every move, because you know, one hit would kill him. With calculated precision, Batman then deployed a pellet of knockout gas, which was disorienting the Hulk, but you know, not knocking him out because it's the Hulk. Exploiting a moment of weakness, Batman incapacitated the Jade Giant by kicking him in the gut, forcing Hulk to inhale. That's right, yeah, Batman kicked Hulk in the gut and actually made him flinch.
Number 4, Asbestos. Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, was one of my favorite superheroes as a kid. He can create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome. His Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, except of course for asbestos. Now, thankfully, in our modern world, we know that asbestos is pretty incredibly toxic, and it's totally banned across most of the world. But you see, back when the Human Torch was first created in 1963, it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. And the Human Torch was wide open to asbestos-based attacks. Specifically though, the Torch has found himself going up against villains based on the stuff, Asbestos Lady and Asbestos Man. Both of these villains made use of asbestos-based outfits or armor and tools of the trade. But like I said, we know this stuff to be incredibly toxic, but we didn't know that then. So as time went on, Asbestos Lady, aka Victoria Murdoch, passed on from idiopathic mesothelioma at age 45, presumably from asbestos exposure, and Asbestos Man was forced to start wearing an oxygen mask and presumably also passed on due to his asbestos exposure. I guess they also had a weakness to the stuff, huh? R.I.P. R.I.P. in the chat.
Getting close to the end of number 3, bullets! Now, with the Flash being the fastest man alive, you'd expect him to, you know, be able to react to things. And while this weakness isn't exactly showcased with the Scarlet Speedster in a meaningful way, it is certainly demonstrated well by his counterpart, the Reverse Flash. Imagine our surprise when Reverse Flash ends up getting popped in the head by none other than Thomas Wayne in the Flashpoint timeline, so that Barry could access enough Speed Force to save the world and bring his son back. Batman shot Reverse Flash in the head. And while this apparently killed Thawne, that was far far from the end of the story, because Thawne started vibrating as fast as he could to slow the destruction of his brain. This gave him more time to avoid death and gave him the ability to hold a grudge. But seriously, shooting a speedster in the head has to be one of the dumbest ways a speedster has been defeated. And that's including the entirety of the Flash TV series, even the final season where he shakes hands with the negative Speed Force.
Number 2. Yellow. Never eat the yellow snow. It's a rule that a lot of us know. While that may be a statement made to stop small children from consuming human or animal pee, I think it would be a perfect saying to introduce into the Green Lantern Corps. Hal Jordan has protected the Earth from interplanetary threats with his incredibly powerful ring and his incredibly powerful will. And yet, you face him armed with a handful of buttercups and he is rendered practically useless. According to the comics, an impurity in the ring's power source meant that Jordan became powerless when faced with the color yellow. This was later expanded by Jeff Johns' Green Lantern Rebirth as being tied to Parallax, a yellow fear entity who was locked in the central power battery, thus weakening it. Now, when you say it like that, it begins to make, I guess, a little bit more sense, but before this was revealed though, Green Lantern's weakness was just dumb. And it still kind of is. This is no more evident than in All-Star Batman and Robin by Frank Miller. Specifically issue number 9 when the Caped Crusader trapped Hal Jordan in a yellow painted room and let a yellow suited Robin go to town on him. And this is all because it's the dumbest weakness we have ever heard of. Bruce Wayne said it himself, so it has to be true.
And it was all yellow. And finally, in at number 1, wood. Wow, look at that. Green Lantern number 1 and number 2. Throughout the years, Green Lantern has encountered various weaknesses tied to his powers, okay, like yellow. But one particular vulnerability has been overlooked by most comic writers, mostly because it's specific to the Alan Scott version. Green Lanterns, they use their powers, they use them to fly, communicate in different languages, create energy constructs, or will constructs, I guess, because, you know, green. But you know, you have to balance it out somehow. So in Alan Scott's case, wood was the chosen weakness. It has an explanation, and it stems from the subconscious belief that his abilities couldn't affect the material, and that's literally it. He didn't have the belief that he could do anything to wood, so he couldn't, which just showcases that belief is the most powerful superpower of all, unless you're facing against a number 2 pencil, which I guess would actually take out both of them.
Number 10. 3 Jokers. Thanks to Batman's time on the Mobius chair during DC's Darkseid War event, Bruce discovered that there are apparently 3 Jokers running around Gotham City. This led to the 3 Jokers story from 2020. 3 crimes were committed on the same night, seemingly all by the Joker. Alongside the Bat family, Batman discovers that these crimes were committed by the 3 different Jokers that he learned about. The original Golden Age Joker, known as the Criminal, the Killing Joke Joker, known as the Clown, and the Silver Age Joker, known as the Comedian. Jason Todd, Barbara Gordon, and Batman himself all team up to go after each Joker one at a time, and as you might expect, it doesn't nearly go that smoothly. This is one of the best Joker stories in recent years. It almost feels like it stands alone outside of any kind of continuity, and that's because it kind of really does. It's incredibly good and surprising and keeps you on your toes, and the revelation of 3 different Jokers was something a lot of people just never expected. But what I think is even better than the 3 Jokers is the chaotic feeling of not knowing if there were actually 3 or if there is a definitive Joker until the end of the story. Number 9. Infamous Iron Man. Of all the things to happen to the character of Dr. Doom, becoming the new Iron Man was not at all what I expected. After the events of Secret Wars and reality being brought back to normal, Victor Von Doom was kinda just unsatisfied with his life. He decided to switch his morality and try to serve and help others instead of being a power-seeking villain. Doom took on a bit of a mentor in Tony Stark, whom he'd always actually respected, but when Tony Stark was put into a coma, Doom decided to take his place as the infamous Iron Man, which was a great reason to give us a Dr. Doom in a highly advanced suit of Iron Man's Model Prime Mark 51 armor. The armor was retrofitted into Doom's style, going from the red and gold to the gray, green, and light blue of Dr. Doom, and it's probably my favorite look ever for an Iron Man armor, period. But alongside the capabilities of the Iron Man armor, Doom was still able to access his magical abilities. To make things even better, Doom's intellect and sorcery were anywhere near their peaks during this period in time, so he is truly an incredibly powerful hero. One of the ways Doom went about saving the world was using his knowledge of the criminal underworld from when he was a criminal to arrest a large gathering of villains in one big move. These villains were all gathered to figure out what they were going to do now that Dr. Doom has switched sides, and then Doom just busts through the roof and takes down heavy hitters like the Wizard, the Wrecking Crew, and the Hood and Jigsaw all in one go. It's awesome. Number 8. Dark Knight. Batman The Dark Knight Returns came to us originally as a way to give Batman/Bruce Wayne a fitting end, and it's easily one of the greatest Batman stories out there, with Frank Miller art that was actually understandable and a great tale that wrapped up the character of Batman in a lovely bow. But then Frank Miller went and created 2 sequels, and the first of which is basically a fever dream of insanity, overly objectified blocky cartoon women, and just really odd visuals, while also taking the character of Superman and completely misunderstanding and disrespecting him. But I think the most egregious moment came when Superman and the third member of the Trinity, Wonder Woman, decided that they were going to hook up, right after Batman beat the absolute snot out of the Man of Steel. Wonder Woman comes in to find Superman completely beaten and ranting about how it's all over, and then, after punching him for being weak, I guess, they immediately just start making out, and then they fly up into the stratosphere and begin going at it mid-air. Then they slam into the ground, causing volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and tsunamis and hurricane-level winds, all for Wonder Woman to say that Superman had moved the earth for her. Wow, so cute. So poetic. And then she exclaims that she is now pregnant, and they decide to go and get a bite to eat. It's really weird. It's really weird.
Moving on to number 7, we have Captain America. Captain America has been mocked in the past for being perceived as a weak superhero, particularly a weak member of the Avengers. Now Steve Rogers gets his superpowers thanks to the Super Soldier Serum, which turned him from a scrawny fine arts student in the comics into a superhero with peak physical strength, speed, durability, agility, reflexes, senses, and mental processing. Now throughout the years, he has lost the serum at times. Plot device much? Once even turning him into an elderly version of Rogers. On top of that, he's often pegged as one of the weaker members of the Avengers, like I mentioned. It ain't easy being compared to the likes of the Hulk or Thor or Iron Man. But when it comes to Cap, it is not just his Super Soldier Serum granted abilities that make him strong. It's his willpower and his mind. He is a master tactician, strategist, and field commander, and sometimes people forget how invaluable those assets are for the Avengers team. In addition to that, Captain America is more than just a person, he is a symbol. Rogers is one of the only superheroes to appropriately represent that symbol. He is a man of honor, and his desire to serve the American people for the greater good is one of his most underlying motivations. And that speaks volumes. And at number 6, Nightcrawler. When we think of Nightcrawler, we think of a blue, devilish looking X-Men member who has an accent and teleports. Teleporting is his power, so it's easy to assume that he isn't much more than a speedy getaway plan. But there is much more than meets the eye when it comes to Kurt Wagner. He has a pretty reasonable amount of strength too. He is capable of lifting approximately 300 pounds, which is 3 times the size of his body weight. He also has enhanced flexibility and agility, night vision, camouflage abilities, and the ability to cling to surfaces. And he's exhibited a limited unconscious extrasensory spatial awareness. Yeah, this prevents him from teleporting into solid objects within his immediate vicinity, which would be no bueno. Up next, number 5, Madame Web. Madame Web, aka Cassandra Webb, first appeared in 1980's The Amazing Spider-Man issue 210. She is an elderly woman with myasthenia gravis, an illness that affects her nervous system and makes her blind and paraplegic. Her husband had designed a life support system for her, which looks like a spider web. She often acts as a mentor figure to Spider-Man. Now, despite never physically fighting any supervillains, her powers lie in her immense intellect. She is telepathic, a clairvoyant with precognitive powers, and has the ability to see all possible outcomes of a situation. That is power. She can sense the presence of psionic powers in others too. And in addition to this, she can perform a psychic form of surgery on other minds when in need. Those are some pretty valuable abilities. Moving on to number 4, Molly Hayes from The Runaways. With a codename the likes of Princess Powerful, it is no surprise that Runaways member Molly Hayes has been underestimated in the past. Molly, the youngest member of the group, and initially the team's only mutant member, has superhuman strength and invulnerability. This is why she would later adopt the alias of Bruiser. In her earlier days, she would become extremely fatigued after using her powers, generally falling asleep after using them. It took a lot of training and experience to alter that. Now being able to use those powers for longer periods of time before exhausting herself, and the effects of those powers are immense. She once toppled a giant monster bigger than a skyscraper, and she's largely believed to be one of Marvel's toughest female superheroes. Moving on to number 3, Mantis. Upon first glance, you can see why some perceive Mantis as weak. Despite being a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Avengers over the years, often Mantis is mistaken as useless, because she doesn't have the more brawny kinds of powers that others do, the likes of superhuman strength, speed, durability, what have you. Instead, Mantis harbors other impressive kinds of power. She is an empath, which gives her the telepathic ability to sense the emotions of others, and in some iterations alter them. Get at you, MCU version. She can instinctively sense weak points in opponents. She once used her knowledge of pressure points to knock Thor, the god of thunder, unconscious. In addition to this, she can also communicate telepathically with the Koltati. She can project energy and astral project, and she can manipulate plants and has an accelerated healing factor. If that still doesn't convince you, go watch Avengers Infinity War. She manages to subdue Thanos' mind in an attempt on Titan to overpower him and steal the gauntlet. It's a collective plan, which failed, thanks to Star-Lord. Remember that? Remember when that was a meme? Yeah. I feel like we've all chilled out in Star-Lord a bit since then, haven't we? Pop culture. Up next at our number 2 spot, Dupe. Dupe is a strange floating creature of unknown origins who speaks in his very own language. He first appeared in X-Force Volume 1, issue 116 in 2001. And for a character who looks like a green pickled thumb with warts, he's crazy powerful. His abilities consist of flight, having an accelerated healing factor, superhuman strength and durability, the ability to replicate physical objects, he is physically malleable, and the most impressive skill of them all, arguably, Dupe has an extra dimensional void within his body that he can store objects and people in. What? Yeah, that's a thing. And he uses it to store an assortment of objects from time to time. He also has a vaguely defined ability to manipulate time and space. He can take on the best of them too. Once Thor tried to hit him with Mjolnir, and Dupe absorbed the hammer into his body, firing out of his mouth back at Thor. In case you're wondering, that went down in the X-Statix vs Avengers storyline in the X-Statix comic. I wish I could be like Dupe and just store all of my camera gear at all times in my body. That'd be so convenient. Finally, in at number 1, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is Marvel's most overrated, underrated character. Not a paradox. If you think about it, it actually makes sense. And she's awesome. So for starters, what can Squirrel Girl do? Well, she has superhuman agility, senses and strength, a prehensile tail, razor-sharp claws, retractable knuckle spikes, and the ability to communicate with squirrels. That latter ability initially made her a bit of a joke, but over the years the character has shown just how resourceful of a superhero she is, and how resourceful her army of squirrels can be. I mean, think about it, an army of anything is still an army. Even if it's squirrels, they got tiny claws and shit, guys. The list of supervillains that Squirrel Girl has defeated is pretty jaw-dropping. She once saved Earth from being consumed by Galactus by having an empathetic, friendly chat with him. She once defeated Thanos. The fight was off panel, but the Watcher confirmed the victory. She once overwhelmed Doctor Doom with her army of squirrels in one of the most humiliating defeats of his to date, saving Iron Man in the process. She was 14 at the time. I feel super unaccomplished. She's highly underestimated in the Marvel Universe, which she works to her advantage.
Number 10, Punisher ends the human race. In the one-shot comic, Punisher: The End, we are introduced to a prison that is executing all of its prisoners in preparation for an upcoming nuclear war, with the guards planning on then hiding out in a bomb shelter that is installed. One of the prisoners is actually Frank Castle, who has grown older and has been caught and locked up. He gets in the shelter before the blast comes, and after a year, he and a companion from the prison exit and start making their way through the wasteland. Frank knows that the radiation levels he is exposing himself to will cause him to die within 72 hours, but keeps moving forwards, eventually getting to his goal: a shelter filled with former billionaires who knew their decisions would lead to an apocalypse and hid themselves away. He prepares to punish them, but the sleazy rich people convince him to spare them long enough to explain the seriousness of the situation to him. The other shelters have fallen silent, and they have the means to continue the species, and if Frank ends them, he will also be ending the human race. Frank then mercilessly and brutally murders everyone, including his companion, before walking into the wastelands to die, happy with his decision, believing nothing good ever came from humanity. It is an interesting book, but it leans so far into the mature rating that characters tend to overindulge in an unnecessary amount of slurs and swears, to the point that it actually somehow makes the whole thing feel more childish than many standard Marvel comics. Number 9, Deadpool Killustrated. The sequel to the first Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe features Deadpool trying to destroy the Marvel Universe by going into other fictional stories that inspired the Marvel heroes in order to prevent any of them from being created. Over the course of the miniseries, we see Deadpool brutally dispatch such classic characters as Don Quixote, the Little Mermaid, Tom Sawyer, the siblings from Little Women, Moby Dick, and the Three Musketeers, while he's pursued through the Ideas-verse by a team of heroes led by Sherlock Holmes. If you're a fan of these classic characters, it can be really brutal to suddenly see them eviscerated as they scream and cry, asking why this is happening. But the sheer stupidity of it obviously makes it pretty funny. The humor cuts some of the brutality, making this rank pretty low on the list. Number 8, Scramble Gets Free. This next entry is dedicated to one of our commenters, Kevin Hawkins, who has asked that I keep teaching him about Canada's super team, Alpha Flight, so that he can continue to learn about more obscure superheroes in order to help him expand his rather narrow tastes. Sure thing, Kevin, I'll keep the Alpha info coming. The original Alpha Flight series had its fair share of brutal moments, but one that has always stuck in my mind is from issue 30, when Heather accidentally releases Madison Jeffries' evil brother, Lionel, otherwise known as Scramble. Scramble has the mutant power to rearrange organic matter. He originally used this power as an army medic in the Vietnam War, but the trauma of the war drove him insane and he was locked away in a hospital. Once he got free, he used his powers to turn the other patients into deformed and grotesque mounds of mutated flesh that then attacked the heroes. Every design in this issue is wonderfully brutal and disgusting, including the creature that Heather is transformed into. The victims are eventually saved and put back in their original shapes, which makes this a bit less brutal, but it was an especially disturbing issue.
Number 7, Red Hood and Batgirl. Jason Todd and Barbara Gordon are admittedly a super weird ship, at least for me. I'm sure there are some of you out there that really love the idea of this couple, but for me, honestly, it's just weird. Granted, this hookup didn't go as far as some others on our list have. Instead of this being a full-on relationship, a one-night stand, or even just a date, this was merely a profession of love from Jason to Babs. Babs, however, took the opportunity to create some boundaries with Jason. She saw he was hurting and wanted to be there for him as someone who also has shared trauma in regards to her relationship with the Joker, and just in terms of someone who's also a Bat family member, so she's kind of like a sister to him. She felt that this shared experience with the villain was basically clouding Jason's mind somewhat, making him feel closer to her romantically, but without there actually being any other real spark between them or reason for them to be together. And honestly, I gotta say, I agree with Babs on this one. Personally, I like Jason Todd best with Artemis, so I'm here for that ship, but this one, not so much.
Number 6, Human Torch and Victorious. Okay, so when Dr. Doom was looking for a wifey to become Queen of Latveria and help him rule, he chose Victorious, his most loyal follower and herald. She obviously and gladly said yes, but unbeknownst to Dr. Doom, the night before that happened, Victorious and Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, defended Latveria's treasures together and somehow found themselves hooking up after 2 of Johnny's other hookups, Elijah and his galactic soulmate Skye, who also shares a psychic connection with the Human Torch, both just flew away. So the last person you'd expect Johnny Storm to get with is who he gets with. No one said Johnny Storm was the brightest of the Fantastic Four, so of course Johnny still goes to the wedding between Dr. Doom and Victorious, just hooked up with in Fantastic Four Volume 6 issue 33. And he just causes problems, like sneaking out at night to try and see her. Victorious totally tells Doom about the entire encounter, but right in the middle of the wedding ceremony, and Dr. Doom, well, he responds how you would imagine Dr. Doom would respond to that. Badly.
Number 5, Supergirl and Comet. Supergirl and Comet is definitely a weird one. While they really only had a brief potential romance, not even a full-on romance, Comet was Supergirl's magical horse. So yeah, I think you can see why this one is weird. I don't know if I really need to justify the awkwardness of this one. Now that being said though, Comet wasn't always a horse. He was accidentally transformed into one. He was actually originally a centaur. I guess that's not that much better, but he was actually going to be turned into a full human. But instead of being turned into a full human, he was accidentally turned into a full horse, which I guess is an easy error to make when you have a centaur. However, when a certain comet flew overhead, he would basically get to be human for a day, which is how he was able to romance Supergirl, albeit admittedly quite briefly.
Number 4, Miss Marvel and Marcus. In Avengers 197 from 1980, Carol Danvers, back when she was Miss Marvel, discovers that she is pregnant. She doesn't remember how it happened, and that sweet little baby is growing quick. Not 3 issues later, in Avengers 200, Carol pops the little sucker out within days of even finding out that she was pregnant, and all the Avengers are like weirdly excited about it, as if it's not the weirdest thing that just happened, and they treat Carol like she's the unreasonable one for not being excited. The baby, who has been named Marcus, grows up into adulthood in basically hours and reveals that he is actually the son of Immortus, the ruler of Limbo and one of the different incarnations of Kang the Conqueror. Immortus had Marcus with a woman he had apparently plucked out of the time stream, but Marcus was trapped in Limbo until he could be born on Earth. So, Marcus had brought Danvers to Limbo, romanced her with a combination of charm and quote, subtle manipulation from Immortus's machines, and he got Miss Marvel pregnant so that he could be born on Earth as her child.
Number 3, Kraven and Queen Goblin. I mean, it's hard to top that last one, but we're gonna try. What is even happening here? Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I did think Queen Goblin was an interesting character when she first appeared in the comics. She was originally the therapist Ashley Kafka, or at least a clone of the original Ashley Kafka. With her work, she attempted to help Ben Reilly during his time and her time working for Beyond as his therapist, back when he was Spider-Man during the whole Beyond story arc in the Spider-Man comic. However, eventually the Beyond Corporation would be revealed as being, surprise, evil, and they would turn Kafka into a villain herself, with her becoming Queen Goblin. Not to be confused with the Goblin Queen, totally different character. And yet this change also resulted in her getting a new villainous beau as well, partnering up with Kraven, or at least, once again, a clone of Kraven, who took the place of his original as his pseudo-son. That's comics for you.
Number 2, Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn. The passing of Gwen Stacy at the hands of the Green Goblin is one of the defining moments in Peter Parker's life, and it cemented Green Goblin as one of Peter's most ruthless foes. But then Marvel and J. Michael Straczynski gave us the Sins Past Spider-Man story arc, and specifically Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 512. 2 twin assassins show up in New York on the trail of the Web-Slinger. To cut to the chase, these twins were actually the secret children of Gwen Stacy and frickin' Norman Osborn from when they had an affair, and their birth was suddenly revealed as the whole reason that Norman even offed Gwen in the first place. But Adam, how are these twins around the same age as Peter is? Apparently, it's because of Norman's enhanced blood, which caused them to age quicker than normal. Basically, Marvel decided that ruining the image of Gwen Stacy and slightly devaluing her passing was worth it to create an extremely overcomplicated story arc that goes nowhere and adds nothing but ickiness to the Spider-Man continuity. Gross.
Number 1, Hulk and She-Hulk. I mean, yeah. While there are other more inappropriate familial relationships in comics, honestly, which is weird, but it's true, this one is still one of the worst out there, and it was even hinted at in the main continuity. That's right, we're not just talking about all realities here, although that also happens with these two. At one point, Hulk basically goes into a crazy rage, and it's revealed that it's kinda because Hulk's like basically in heat. Also, I think like super depressed and lonely, and so he goes into heat. I don't know. She-Hulk attempts to calm him down, and as a result, he attempts to catch her and mate with her. Fortunately, this doesn't end up happening, but the other messed up part of this whole thing is that a part of Hulk's mating ritual seems to be to like actually cause harm to She-Hulk. I mean, there's messed up, and then there's the Hulk level of messed up, and this is definitely the latter of those.
Coming in at number 10 today, it's Luke Cage's impenetrable skin. Thanks to the super soldier experiment known as the Burstein process, Luke Cage Power Man does have incredible strength, stamina, and a healing factor, but he is pretty much most known for the fact that he is protected by indestructible, impenetrable, super dense skin. That is an awesome power to have. Luke is protected from almost anything with this titanium-like skin, but the problem here is that this natural shield isn't just shielding him from the outside. Whenever Luke Cage is internally injured, which is rarely, the character requires more than almost anyone else ever would. It's next to impossible to perform surgery on Luke Cage unless you happen to have access to an overpowered medical laser. The natural ways someone might be healed from some kind of internal injury do not apply, as doctors can't even cut through Cage's skin to begin the procedure in the first place. As you can imagine, this can be pretty problematic.
In a 50% off sales, Captain Margaret Elizabeth, or Peggy Carter, was a distinguished Avenger and founding member of the Illuminati, who played a crucial role in the Infinity War of 2018 of our world, where she valiantly fought against Thanos and aided during the Battle of Titan. In the aftermath, when Doctor Strange utilized the Darkhold for dreamwalking, resulting in a multiversal threat of, incursions, Carter, along with the rest of the Illuminati, voted in favor of executing him to safeguard their universe. In the years that followed, Carter found herself residing over a hearing concerning an alternate version of Doctor Strange who was apprehended by Baron Mordo on suspicions of posing a similar danger. Before the vote could be finalized though, to condemn this alternate Doctor Strange, their headquarters came under attack by the Scarlet Witch. Carter and her fellow Illuminati confronted her, but tragically she met her demise when Scarlet Witch used her own shield to cut her in half, hence the 50% off sale. The amount of times that Cap has caught his shield though makes me question why Carter was able to be cut in half by hers.
Number 8. Chickens, or electorophobia. The mutant Domino is pretty darn unique. Her mutant ability allows her to subliminally and psionically initiate random kinetic phenomena that affect probability in her favor by making improbable, but importantly not impossible, things to occur within her line of sight. What does that mean? Basically she has good luck. Really good luck. So how do you give a weakness to someone with such a strange and honestly powerful power as luck? Easy. You make her absolutely terrified of chickens. Now obviously not a lot of people are running across chickens very often, and I think that holds true for superheroes, but for someone with such super powered luck as Domino, she runs into chickens more than should be acceptable, and that's pretty unlucky because her fear of chickens is quite debilitating. Number 7. Sins Past. Look, I hate talking about this as much as you hate hearing about it, but Marvel did it and I don't think we should forget that. The passing of Gwen Stacy at the hands of the Green Goblin is one of the defining moments in Peter Parker's life, and it cemented Green Goblin as one of Peter's most ruthless foes. Then, Marvel and J. Michael Straczynski gave us the Sins Past Spider-Man story arc, and specifically, Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 512. Two twin assassins show up in New York on the trail of the Whipslinger, and to cut to the chase, these twins were actually the secret children of Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn, from when they had an affair, and their birth was suddenly revealed as the whole reason that Norman even took out Gwen in the first place. But the question is, how are these twins around the same age as Peter? Apparently it's because of Norman's enhanced blood, which caused them to age quicker than normal. Basically, Marvel decided that ruining the image of Gwen Stacy and slightly devaluing her passing was worth it to create an extremely overcomplicated arc that goes nowhere and adds nothing but ickiness to the Spider-Man continuity, and then it got retconned. Number 6. Marriage. The wedding of Batman and Catwoman was a big deal. It was teased at and built up for a long time. Fans were genuinely excited to see it happen and to see what would come next after the fact. A kid of Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne would be awesome. At least it would be awesome, but sadly the wedding that was so coveted never came to be. Batman issue 50 came and went, and following suit, so did Catwoman. She came and went from Bruce, literally leaving the groom at the altar. Batman was marrying Catwoman so he could actually be happy, and after some convincing words from criminals like the Joker and her friend Holly, Catwoman believed that if Bruce Wayne was happy, then Batman couldn't be Batman. Which, one, that's just depressing, but two, both the Joker and Holly, alongside Riddler, Gotham Girl, Flashpoint, Thomas Wayne Batman, and other villains, were actually working for Bane, who was manipulating events in order to break Batman emotionally and give rise to the City of Bane event. It certainly sent Batman down a path of absolute despair. He became much more drastic with his fighting of criminals, particularly an innocent Mr. Freeze, and he even donned a less advanced version of his Batsuit that he would just take more of a beating. It's just sad. Number 5. Spider-Man's black suit. Spider-Man's red and blue classic suit is extremely iconic, and I don't think anyone thinks that it's bad. The Sam Raimi version of that suit is beautiful, but the black spider suit that appeared in Secret Wars? Whew, that suit was something else. If you tell me that you don't like this one, you are a liar, and two, we cannot be friends. This suit was actually designed by a guy called Randy Schuler for a contest that Marvel had, and they paid him $220 for it. $220 for one of the most fan-beloved Spider-Man suits of all time. $220 for what would eventually become one of Spider-Man's greatest villains and a eventually one of Marvel's most popular anti-heroes, Venom. It's the best investment that they ever made. The black symbiote suit was so great and so popular that Marvel even came up with excuses for Peter to get a regular cloth version of the suit made by his girlfriend, Black Cat. That was not a brain-consuming symbiote and just had the benefit of stealth, intimidation, and looking sexy. And at number 4 today is Bealia. Black Adam does not give a damn. The only things he has shown to care about are himself, his family, and his country. He has ripped someone in half as a warning to not mess with Kahndaq, which is his country. He has obliterated Psycho Pirate's face for manipulating his own mind, and he took on almost the entire superhuman community in the World War III event. But the whole catalyst for that last one was because he completely decimated the entire innocent population of the country of Bealia. The science squad of Oolong Island, it's a weird name I know, created the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse for the express purpose of wiping out the Black Marvel family. Now after the passing of Isis and Osiris, Black Adam's direct family, he hunted the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse to take revenge. This brought him to the country of Bealia. Now when he couldn't find the Horsemen, his rage and frustration got the better of him and he essentially attacked the whole frickin' country. Adam's rampage ended countless innocent people's existences. It was easily his most terrible act as they had done absolutely nothing wrong and he was just blinded by cold hard rage. Number 3. Mar-Vell. Mar-Vell of the Kree was Marvel Comics' original Captain Marvel, and he was also the first Marvel superhero to permanently pass away when he succumbed to cancer in 1982's The Death of Captain Marvel. That was a huge moment in comic book lore, and he remains to be one of the only heroes to have passed away and not get resurrected. The character has reappeared as visions or in flashbacks and obviously in alternate realities, but he never came back really. One of the coolest and most unexpected ways he did reappear, however, was in the alternate universe which became known as the Cancerverse. It's just a really cool and creative idea. Basically, on his infamous deathbed, the Many-Angled Ones contact and corrupt the dying Mar-Vell, granting him new powers which he used to transmute the other heroes, and with Mar-Vell as their lord, they completely took down the Avatar of Death, which in turn completely destroyed Death itself, stopping people from ever actually passing away. This, in turn, allowed the Many-Angled Ones to invade this reality, and it became a nightmare. Number 2. Invincible Ultimatum. David Anders, aka Dinosaurus, appearing in the Invincible comic book series, is an interesting villain. While he does incredibly evil things, he is genuinely trying to save the world and the human race from climate change and the fact that we are destroying our own planet and resources. Following in the logic of the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few, he has done some truly awful things, like destroying the entirety of Las Vegas. But still, Invincible saw the good in this villain, somehow, and he decided to team up with him anyways. Unfortunately, that was a mistake. From Invincible issue 98 to 100, we got an event called The Death of Everyone. Mark had been affected by the Scourge virus and had temporarily lost his powers. Because of this, Dinosaurus took things into his own hands, distracting Invincible and the other heroes with devices in Los Angeles that caused earthquakes. Meanwhile, his real plan was to detonate devices all over Greenland, melting ice and leading to a massive rise in sea level, wiping out thousands of people living in the world's coastal cities. This leads to a massive fight between Mark and Dinosaurus, during the climax of which Dino completely ends Mark by squishing his head till it pops. Now it turns out the person who Dinosaurus squished and ripped apart was actually a very convincing clone that he swapped out for Invincible mid-fight to make the world think that Mark was hard deleted from life. And finally, in at number 1 today is Marvel vs. DC. Marvel Comics and DC Comics have for a long time been the 2 biggest comic book companies that we have, but the 90s were a rough time for comics. To help fight abysmal sales, the 2 companies staged a crossover. When 2 entities known as the Brothers, the embodiments of both the Marvel and DC multiverses, remembered each other's existence due to some multiversal and reality-based tomfoolery, they pitted combatants from their respective realities together to decide who was better and who should be destroyed. This gave us the 1996 series called simply DC vs. Marvel. Heroes and villains across both universes ended up facing off. Storm faced off against Wonder Woman, Superman fought the Hulk, and for whatever reason, Robin faced off against the X-Men Jubilee. I don't know. DC vs. Marvel was shameless fan service, and no one cared because it was awesome. Sure, it wasn't particularly that well written or drawn, but whatever. over. As a solution to the conflict, the Living Tribunal from Marvel and the Spectre from DC joined forces and combined the two universes together, creating the Amalgam Universe. A universe that had its own unique history and was a combination of both DC and Marvel with mashed together characters like Darkclaw. A crossover like this hadn't happened before, and it probably won't ever happen again. But I for one am just glad that it happened at all.
Starting us off in at number 10, Aquaman. Arthur Curry Aquaman is anything but weak. Anyone familiar with his skill set or any of the feats that he's accomplished over the years will know that to be true. Yet Aquaman has a reputation of being a laughable hero. This is all thanks to a Silver Age portrayal of him that wasn't even in the comics. We're talking about the animated television series Super Friends, where he was depicted as a weak and wholesome superhero in comparison to his Justice League peers. And then there's that seemingly ceaseless joke concerning his communication with aquatic life. In reality, Arthur is an Atlantean demigod hybrid. Whoa. He's the king of Atlantis. Whoa! His aquatic physiology provides him powers likes of superhuman strength, speed, endurance, agility, durability, reflexes and senses, telepathic control of all aquatic life, the ability to speak and understand any language on Earth, underwater adaptation, and in many alternate reality versions of himself, hydrokinesis. All in all, it's tough to argue that Aquaman is a weak character. Maybe weakly written, but definitely not a weak character innately. Moving on to number 9, Black Widow. Compared to our previous number, Black Widow Natasha Romanoff is a bit tougher of a character to argue for. She is human, she has no superpowers, and yet she manages to keep up with the best of them. Aside from a little help from tech, Black Widow has proven to be a dangerous foe in most capacities. She has a gifted intellect. Natasha has an uncanny affinity for psychological manipulation, and is able to mask her emotions perfectly. She's an expert tactician, a pro when it comes to hand-to-hand combat and espionage, and an expert marksman along with other weapons. And she's got an enhanced immune system thanks to her exceptional white blood cells. All of that combined makes her incredibly dangerous. But trust us, she probably would want you to underestimate her. It would make the satisfaction of kicking your butt that much sweeter. Moving on to number 8, Cannonball. Cannonball, aka Sam Gerthy, first appeared in Marvel graphic novel issue 4, The New Mutants, in 1982. And while he's probably one of the lesser known characters on our list, he is a force to be reckoned with. The reason why Gerthy is often assumed to be weak is because of his mutant abilities. He can fly at jet speeds while encased in an impenetrable force field. Sure, that's great from a defensive standpoint, but you can imagine why some feel like he's a little useless. On the flip side of that, some would argue that he's one of the most powerful non-Omega level mutants. Since his debut, he has grown in power. His body generates thermochemical energy that releases from his skin, allowing him not only to speed through the air with great maneuverability, but he can manipulate it to have other effects. He can fire this thermochemical energy blast from almost any part of his body, manifested as an impenetrable and virtually indestructible blast field to protect himself from harm. He can extend that shield to protect others, and shape it around them however he chooses. He can use it to imprison others, he can use it to absorb outside kinetic impacts to supply himself with additional energy, and he can increase the power of his blows in combat to create an explosive shock upon impact. I don't know about you, but I would not want to get on this fella's bad side.
Number 7, Jericho vs. Vigilante. Okay, so I did talk about this one for brutal villain defeats, but I had no idea this moment happened before, so if we're talking about brutal DC moments we never saw coming, this one for sure hits the mark for me. Joey Wilson, aka Jericho, is the son of the infamous assassin Deathstroke the Destroyer, but despite that fact, Jericho made almost every effort to be a hero, and he was one. He was even a member of the Teen Titans, the team that consistently stands against his own dad. Now Jericho has the ability, granted to him by the same method that granted his dad his abilities, to transfer his consciousness into the body of another using eye contact and take control of them, effectively possessing them. And it was pretty powerful. He could control some pretty strong beings. Unfortunately, every time he did this, a small shred of the individual psyche remained in his head. At first, it was nothing that he couldn't deal with, just 1 or 2 psyches, but over time, possessing multiple people, he had so many psyches floating through his head that it drove him insane. Now the rogue anti-hero known as Vigilante took on the responsibility of stopping Jericho, and where Vigilante originally planned to just go the quick route and completely end Jericho, Jericho's sister stood firm that her brother was a good person at heart and should not lose his life. Vigilante heard her out and decided to not deal with this threat in a lethal way. Instead, after Jericho was captured and in the back of a police vehicle, Vigilante paid the guy a visit and just completely took Jericho's eyes from his head. It eliminated the threat of Jericho's powers, sure, but I can probably think of a dozen different ways that this course of action could have been averted.
Number 6, Joker's Payback. Seriously? The Joker? I mean, what is wrong with this guy? Another horrible moment that haunts me. In fact, this whole story haunts me, not just this one moment, which comes from Brian Azzarello's The Joker. This story follows Johnny Frost, who was tasked with going to pick up the Joker after he's been released from prison. Finally out of the clink, Joker returns to check up on some old friends and old businesses. One of his first stops is a bar and business where Harley Quinn has been dancing while he was away. Not appreciating that Harley has gotten involved in this kind of business, Joker decides to take it out on the man running the establishment by skinning him alive, much to Frost's horror. Although, to be honest, this is really only the beginning and things only get much worse from there, especially from Johnny's perspective.
Number 5, Abandoned at the Altar. The wedding of Batman and Catwoman was a big frickin' deal. It was teased at and built up for a long time. Fans were genuinely excited to see it happen and to see what could come next after the fact. A kid of Selena Kyle and Bruce Wayne, what would that be like? We've seen futures where they end up together, but sadly, the wedding that was so coveted never came to be. Batman issue 50 came and went, and following suit, so did Catwoman. Came and went from Bruce's life, literally leaving the groom at the altar. Not like permanently leaving his life, but kind of. Batman was marrying Catwoman so he could literally be happy, and after some convincing words from criminals like the Joker and her friend Holly, Catwoman believed that if Bruce Wayne was happy, then Batman couldn't be Batman, which, 1, that's depressing as hell, but 2, both the Joker and Holly, alongside Riddler, Gotham Girl, Flashpoint, Thomas Wayne, Batman, and other villains, were working for Bane, who was manipulating events in order to break Batman emotionally and give rise to the City of Bane event. Well, it certainly sent Batman down a path of absolute despair. He became much more drastic with his fighting of criminals, particularly an innocent Mr. Freeze, and he even donned a less advanced version of his Batsuit so that he would take more of a beating. Like, come on. Guy's been through enough.
Number 4, the non-canonical made canon. One of the weirdest things with DC is how sometimes they just completely leave their stories open to being canon or not, kinda depending on how they're received by fans. And one of the weirdest incidents of this happening is with The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke, written by Alan Moore, was never intended by him to be part of the main continuity. And as far as I know, it kinda isn't really, except for one part of the story, the attack on Barbara Gordon, the pain she suffered, and the result of that attack, her becoming paralyzed from the waist down. Why this was the only thing we chose to keep from this story, I do not know, but the whole idea of it just feels super weird, especially when you consider how brutal and graphic this attack was, where Barbara gets no opportunity to defend herself, having been surprised by the Joker's visit while visiting her dad in her civilian form. This element of the story would change Barbara's life forever, and although I do like Babs as Oracle, and I feel like we're able to actually at least turn it into something good, it feels like she was kind of robbed of, some agency here, especially when you consider the story was never really intended to be incorporated into the canon, and it also still kinda wasn't.
Number 3, Maxwell Lord and Ted Cord. I made a rhyme. I think we can all agree that it's incredibly rare to see a mainline superhero taken out of the picture, and if it does happen, it's usually in a huge blaze of glory, or an incredibly tragic moment, or after a long momentous battle with cancer in the case of Marvel's Marvel. So, when Ted Cord was erased from existence thanks to a bullet from a barrel at the hands of Maxwell Lord in the Countdown to Infinite Crisis, it kinda sucked. After following Ted the whole book as he struggles for anyone in the Justice League to take him seriously, while he's correctly on the trail of Maxwell and learning of all his misuse of both the Justice League's files, Batman's Brother Eye satellite, and the OMAX, you'd expect Cord to come out surviving, having a cathartic moment where he finally gets the League's respect or to make a dent in Lord's plans, but instead he gets snuffed out like a tea-light candle that never even begun to make the wax melt. It's abrupt, brutal, and it made me legitimately very sad to read it.
Number 2, Face Off. One of the most brutal moments that still haunts me to this day, of course, involves the Joker. Because of course he's one of the most twisted and often brutal characters that we have over at DC, I would say. This one comes to us from around the time of Death of the Family. In this story, Joker ended up removing his face in order to reinvent himself. Needless to say, this didn't last forever, but it was a terrifying time, and honestly, I'm not sure how Joker lived after doing this, considering that I'm pretty sure he would have been opening himself up to all kinds of nasty infections. Despite removing his face, Joker would later recover and somehow reapply said face, despite the fact that the face was not well stored in between, cause comics, I guess. Ugh.
Number 1, Fridged. This DC Comics brutal moment caused the whole coining of a term and changed the way comic books were written going forward. Green Lantern Kyle Rayner came home one day after doing his superhero thing in Green Lantern issue number 54 from 1994 to find his then girlfriend, photojournalist Alexandra DeWitt, had been very savagely stripped of her life at the hands of the villain known as Major Force. But not only did Major Force take Alexandra's life, but for seemingly no reason, he also stuffed her into the couple's fridge. It was incredibly brutal and served only to give Kyle, the male antagonist of the story, the motivation to reach new heights as a hero, while her character, who was genuinely likable and could stand on her own, was gone forever. This was a trope in not only comics but media in general, that presented viewers and readers with the idea of sacrificing the female love interest for the direct purpose of motivating the male hero, which practically never happened in the reverse. After this comic came out, the trope was finally given a name: fridging, or women in refrigerators, and it changed the way female characters were written in comics for the most part. Going forward.
Number 10, Wolverine loses his skeleton. During 1993's Fatal Attractions crossover event, the X-Men once again had to go up against their old rival, Magneto. The X-Men got the upper hand in this conflict by using the combined psychic powers of Jean Grey and Professor X to cause Magneto to relive all of his worst memories in order to distract him, which is already pretty brutal when you consider that Magneto was a prisoner in German death camps in World War II. Wolverine attacks Magneto and gets a good scratch in, which leads the Master of Magnetism to do one of the most disturbing things imaginable to the fuzzy Canadian. He pulls out Wolverine's metal skeleton, leaving him a twisted heap of adamantium as the X-Men can only look on in horror. It's a brutal moment, but it doesn't really fit the never saw it coming side of this. I mean, he's a guy with metal bones fighting a guy named Magneto. If anything, I'm surprised this doesn't happen more often. Number 9, Sentry vs. Ares. When Norman Osborn set his sights on conquering Asgard, he tricked the god of war Ares into helping him do it. As the battle raged on, Ares discovered that he had been tricked and turned on Osborn, vowing to destroy him. Unfortunately, Norman had the Sentry with him. Worst still, this version of Sentry had given in to the darker urges of his void self. Ares did his best against Sentry, but the fight ended in a truly brutal fashion, with Sentry ripping Ares in half in a shower of gore and entrails. It's a lot, but although you could make the case for it being one of the most graphic Marvel moments, I don't think it checks enough emotional boxes for me to consider it the most brutal by any means. Number 8, Punisher's Steamroller. Frank Castle isn't known for working well with others, but if there's anyone you'd think he'd get along with, it would be Wolverine. They teamed up in Punisher Volume 6, number 17, and it quickly went off the rails, with them being swarmed by a gang of little people who wanted to cut off their legs in order to make them short. In order to get Wolverine into a fit of berserker rage, Frank makes fun of Logan's height, causing Wolverine to go after him. Wolverine calmed down, but Punisher decided that he was slowing him down and blasted Wolvie's legs apart. After taking care of the gang of little people, Frank decides that the best way to keep Wolverine from coming after him is to run him over with a steamroller. Wolverine will obviously heal, so it doesn't have long-term consequences, but it's still a pretty rough move on Frank's part. Number 7, Thanos Rising. Thanos Rising is a mini-series that explores the origins of one of Marvel's most iconic villains, Thanos the Mad Titan. It starts with him as a child, and explores his early courtship with Death, who keeps manipulating him into situations that cause Thanos to kill. At first he is taking out lizards that hurt his friends, but this soon escalates into him capturing classmates in order to dissect them to see what is wrong with him in comparison to others. He insists that all the death is just a means to an end, but eventually admits that he has grown to enjoy it. This solidifies when he decides to capture and dissect his mother so that he can continue to find out why he is different, showing no remorse or care for his actions. It is a brutal origin for the character, and honestly, for a character as twisted as Thanos, nothing else would have sufficed. Number 6. Deadpool kills his parents. Part of the original Sin Comics, Deadpool Volume 5 Issue 34 features a twisted tale from the Merc with the Mouth's past. It takes place in the 90s and is drawn in a style that reflects that. In this story, we see Deadpool in his early days as a brainwashed assassin. His handler decides to test how deeply they have Wade under their control and sends him and Sabretooth to his childhood home with the mission of ending the lives of his own parents. Wade doesn't have much memory of his past and eagerly goes for the house, but he is stopped from attacking his parents. Kevin, you are never gonna guess who stops him. It's 90s Alpha Flight, who I'm honestly surprised haven't crossed paths with Deadpool more often. The two teams fight, and Sabretooth and Deadpool manage to get away, their mission a failure. The jovial tone of the book then takes a sharp turn as Deadpool grabs a drink, returns to his childhood home, and silently takes a tour of the strange and familiar sights before setting the house on fire and getting into the car with Sabretooth without a word. The fact that the book is so lighthearted before this moment makes the final blow so much more brutal. Number 5. Hulk, The End. While I found Punisher, The End to be kinda bad and immature despite trying really hard to be mature, I really like the Hulk, The End story. In this book, the world has come to an end after a nuclear war, and all of humanity has died off, save Bruce Banner, who is now over 200 years old. He wanders the world by himself, wanting to die, but being unable to, as the Hulk wants to continue being the strongest one there is. The only creatures that have survived are giant mutated swarms of bugs, who chase and devour the Hulk, always leaving him a mutilated mess on the ground before leaving him to heal. This continues for years until Bruce realizes that he is the modern Prometheus, who brought fire to the people of Earth from the gods and was punished by being left alone to be consumed by birds. Bruce finally passes, leaving the Hulk to wander the wasteland completely alone for all time. Number 4. Marvel Zombies, Dead Days. In Marvel Zombies, we are shown a world where all of the Earth's heroes have been transformed into flesh-eating zombies who are trying to find more humans to consume to sate their seemingly unending appetite. In the one-shot comic Dead Days, we are shown the last days of the human race, as well as our favorite heroes becoming the cruel monsters we know from Marvel Zombies. There are some brutal and disturbing moments, such as Spider-Man turning and eating Mary Jane. Okay, Kevin will appreciate this. We get to see the zombified Alpha Flight attacking the X-Men after having ate Professor X before they are graphically dispatched by Magneto. We also get to see She-Hulk eating Val and Franklin Richards before having her head blown off by Sue Storm. Every page is more disturbing than the last, but I think the worst part is when Reed Richards decides that zombies are actually the next step in evolution and infects the other Fantastic Four members and then allows them to feed on him and turn him as he smiles. Number 3. Civil War. For anyone only familiar with the movie adaptation of Marvel's Civil War, the reasons behind the Superhero Registration Act are a bit different, and much more awful. The story begins with the superhero team The New Warriors about to raid a home in Stamford, Connecticut, where a group of supervillains are hiding out. The New Warriors were filming a reality show and were being extremely careless when they attacked the villains. The resulting fight led to the villain Nitro and Namorita fighting in front of a school full of children. Nitro then exploded, wiping out the school and the surrounding area. Hundreds of civilians, most of the villains, and most of the heroes all died as a result. It is a rough way to start off the book and really does a good job of setting up the moral quandary at the heart of the story. Number 2. Ruins. You guys were super helpful with recommendations in the comments in part 1, and a lot of the entries on this list are from there, so thank you. One of the ones I wasn't familiar with that a lot of you mentioned was Marvel Ruins, and you were right. It's a rough one. Marvel Ruins is a 2-part mini-series that essentially asks the question of what would the Marvel Universe be if instead of accidents resulting in heroes getting powers, they just got sick and died. For example, in this universe, Matt Murdock saved the old man from getting hit from the truck, and the radioactive goop that got in his eyes caused him to die in the hospital without growing up and becoming Daredevil. Wolverine has a painful bone disease. Captain America introduced Nick Fury to cannibalism at some point. Jean Grey is a teenager selling herself on the street before being killed by Fury, who then takes his own life. Okay, Kevin is gonna be so thrilled. revealed, we even get a brief look at Alpha Flight's Aurora and North Star, who are homeless, naked, and starving on the streets. Everything is awful. But my favorite bit comes from issue 2, where it is revealed that when Peter Parker was bitten by the radioactive spider, it gave him a deadly and contagious radiation disease that is spreading among the population. The book is relentless. There's not really much of a story thread other than what if everything sucked? And it answers that question in great and brutal detail. Number 1, the death of the X-Men. The Old Man Logan story takes place on an Earth where the villains finally got organized and teamed up to take over the world, under the command of the Red Skull. The book is filled with disturbing ideas and moments, such as Hulk having an evil gang of Hulk children with his cousin She-Hulk. But the worst, in my opinion, is how the villains took out the X-Men on the night they came to power. Wolverine was monitoring the situation with Jubilee when the X-Mansion was suddenly attacked by supervillains. As the children fled, Wolverine made a brave final stand against the bad guys, cutting them down one at a time until there were none left. It was then that Mysterio revealed that the whole thing had been an illusion, and Logan had been attacking his own teammates the entire time. I don't think it gets worse than that. Although, I can picture it happening to Adam here at Top 10 Nerd.
At number 10 is Carnage and the Joker. Sounds like absolute chaos. As the Marvel and DC universes converged, the plot unfolded with a certain unnaturalness as Dr. Cassandra Breyer's audacious attempt to pacify these two malevolent menaces using microchips took an ominous turn when Carnage, the symbiote psychopath, effortlessly short-circuited the implant. Meanwhile, the Joker, not to be outdone, suffered a similar fate. This nightmarish duo then embarked on an unaliving spree with their unholy union a brief affair. However, there was a clash between them, driven by differing philosophies on eliminating people, which culminated in an epic showdown with Batman and Spider-Man. You see, Joker was all about having a plan, and Carnage was like, screw that, let's just cause chaos, and apparently, their different philosophies didn't coalesce. Carnage and the Joker's inability to cooperate, while expected, was a fortunate twist, preventing unimaginable catastrophe. I mean, had these two serial unalivers coordinated, countless lives would have been lost to their chaotic malevolence. At number 9 is the Leader and the One Below All. Comic world has witnessed some spine-tingling team-ups, but few saw the nightmarish alliance between the Hulk's arch-nemesis, the Leader, and the malevolent cosmic entity known as the One Below All. The Jade Giant, who's known for smashing his way through the MCU, has transformed into a true horror icon in the comics thanks to the masterful storytelling in Immoral Hulk. Enter the One Below All, which is a sinister, demonic force that Samuel Stearns, the brilliant but deranged leader, willingly submits to. His aim is to obliterate not only the Hulk, but the entire world, morphing it into a grotesque Cronenberg-esque nightmare. The unholy partnership has taken the Hulk's adversaries to a whole new level of terror, creating a chilling narrative that keeps fans on the edge of their seats. If you're enjoying this video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is the Joker and the Violator. Okay, a Carnage and Joker crossover was cool and all, but how about the Joker working with a literal demon clown from Spawn, if you haven't guessed? Violator, an immortal servant of Satan with inhuman strength and fire-breathing abilities, now allies himself with the Joker in a multiverse-shaking partnership. Batman and Spawn, facing the Court of Owls, reluctantly seek Joker's help, only to discover that they've fallen into a trap orchestrated by the Joker and the Violator. The history of the Joker's unholy alliance suggests likely a monstrous transformation later down the road, but betrayal could also be on the horizon. As the two most feared clowns in comics unite, the questions arise about Joker's transformation under the Violator's influence and his ultimate strategy against such a potent source of evil.
Number 7, Alpha Flight versus Michael Pointer. During the events of M-Day, a mutant named Michael Pointer was taken over by an evil being called the Collective, who used him to destroy an Alaskan town. S.H.I.E.L.D. sent in a couple fighter jets to keep an eye on the situation, but they were promptly destroyed and the Collective made his way into Canada. Now, keep in mind, this is a list of brutal moments for me. So imagine my excitement reading an Avengers issue where my favorite superhero team, Alpha Flight, shows up to try and reason with the villain. Now imagine my horror when the SHIELD agent's command center suddenly loses contact and the next thing I saw was the entire team's twisted and mangled corpses. These guys had their own 130 issue series for years, so it's not like they're just nobodies, and now they were suddenly just dead. Now I get that not many people like the team as much as I do, so for perspective, imagine if your favorite team was the Fantastic Four, and they were horribly mutilated off panel. Oh, poor Guardian. That's like the 5th time he's died. I think that what makes this such a brutal moment for me, beyond my personal attachment to the characters, is that it is so quick and off panel, leaving us to imagine what horrible things were done to leave such a terrified looking gory mess of Canada's super team. Number 6. Rick Jones's fate worse than death. Immortal Hulk is a cosmic horror series with plenty of brutal moments, with characters constantly getting eviscerated and transformed into creatures that are pure nightmare fuel. You could make the case for Banner, Absorbing Man, or any of the Hulks earning this spot, but no one quite got as brutal a fate as Hulk's old friend Rick Jones. When the Shadow Base wanted to go after the Hulk, they combined the deceased Rick's body with that of the Abomination, causing Rick to transform into a bizarre and terrifying creature with 2 of Rick's faces and hands growing out of his head, which would vomit acid at the Hulk while Rick begged for help. He was eventually removed from this abomination, but a few issues later, he was once again fused with a gamma mutate, this time Del Fry, leaving Rick a twisted co-joined mess with Rick's screaming head being the arm of a glowing green skeleton creature. Number 5. Carnage USA. One of Spider-Man's most brutal and sadistic villains is Carnage. He is a serial murderer named Cletus Cassidy, who bonded with a symbiote and became an even more dangerous and twisted villain. He has had a lot of brutal moments over the years, such as his actions in Maximum Carnage and Deadpool vs. Carnage, but my preference is for the miniseries Carnage USA. In this story, Carnage goes to a small town and sneaks into a meatpacking plant in order to eat an entire herd of cattle so that he can get strong enough to take over the town. He sends the symbiote in through the water pipes and takes over men, women, and children, forcing them to attack each other and holding a few of them hostage for and amusement. There are some brutal Cletus moments, such as sending a woman out to collect her husband's head in order to secure the safety of her children, but my favorite and most twisted is when he gathers all of the survivors in a church, hands out a bunch of pliers, and demands they pull out their own teeth in exchange for his mercy. Number 4. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe again. In Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, Deadpool became aware of his status as a fictional character and lost his mind, going on a brutal kill streak that resulted in all the Marvel heroes and villains getting dispatched in cruel and unusual ways. A few years later, in the sequel, we got to see a Deadpool from another world do the same thing. On this Earth, Deadpool is put under mind control by the villains of the Marvel Universe and tricked into going after his friends. What makes it even more disturbing than the first for me was the fact that while he's attacking the heroes, he is living a fantasy in his head that makes him think that he is going on lighthearted adventures with his friends. This is especially true of his encounter with Spider-Man while bonded with the Venom symbiote. In his mind, Deadpool and Spidey are entered into a pie-eating contest against the Blob in order to win money for charity. In reality, he's actually feasting on Spider-Man's brains. It's more brutal due to the lack of agency he's given in his story and the devastating consequences that it holds. Number 3. The Ultimatum Wave. The Marvel Ultimate Universe was a wild ride. It gave us Miles Morales as well as the romance between Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, so it makes sense that they would also give us some of the most bizarre and extreme Marvel stories. In Ultimatum, Magneto has been driven mad at the loss of his children and decides that rather than destroying humanity to make the world safe for mutants, he's just gonna kill everyone. He uses a doomsday device and his powers to shift the world off of its axis Aquarius, causing natural disasters all over the globe. Much of Europe, including all of Latveria, is frozen under a layer of ice, and New York is hit by a massive tidal wave. Millions of people all over the world die in the attack, including Nightcrawler and Hank McCoy. Magneto then sends out more of his minions to destroy the heroes, causing the brutal deaths of several more heroes, including Hank Pym, Doctor Strange, and Thor, just to name a few. Professor X gets personally murdered by Magneto, who later has his face blasted off by Cyclops, who then gets assassinated at an anti-mutant rally. It is a relentless story, but I think the most brutal moment is when Pym finds his wife Janet being eaten by the Blob and responds by entering his giant form, picking up the Blob, and biting his head off. Number 2, Marvel Zombies. Marvel Zombies is pretty self-explanatory. It takes place on an alternate Earth where the heroes of the Marvel Universe have been infected with a zombie virus. They retain much of their intelligence and personality, but they are so consumed with hunger that they are willing to go to any lengths to get to their next meal. There is something so brutal about watching all of your favorite heroes hunt down Magneto and brutally and graphically eat him in the opening pages, and it only gets more disturbing from there. I'd say that the most brutal moment in this story is the revelation that Hank Pym has been keeping T'Challa sedated but alive in a lab, and he has been removing his limbs one by one to eat. It's a brutal and disgusting story that you can't help but have fun reading. Number 1, Spider-Man's take on September 11th. There are way more gory and graphic Marvel moments on this list, but the fact that this comic features the real-life tragedy of September 11th, 2001 makes it hard to justify putting it lower on the list. Like, I can't sit here and say that a fictional tidal wave was worse than this. Anyways, this issue of Amazing Spider-Man was released a month after the tragedy and opens with Spider-Man surveying the devastation as civilians ask him why he didn't stop the attack. The book is kind of a mixed bag with the benefit of hindsight, with devastating moments like a little boy lost in the rubble looking for his dad, but also features moments like Doctor Doom crying at the sight of the devastation, as if he hasn't tried to do this exact same thing multiple times. I have mixed feelings about whether this book should have been made so soon after the real life events, but wherever you land, it's hard not to describe the events depicted as
Number 10, Joe Fixit and Red She-Hulk/Red Harpy. For a book that's about a giant green monster that's potentially a vessel for the opposite to God that preys on the nightmares and rage of mankind, Immortal Hulk has a lot of heartfelt moments. Betty Ross and Bruce Banner's relationship is complex. They were so good together at first, but obviously the Hulk makes things complicated, and Bruce has a lot of childhood stuff and daddy issues to get through, like a metric butt ton. Eventually, Betty passed away, but she came back and became the Red She-Hulk, and then she fused that persona with that of her Harpy persona that she has become a few times, so that she was the Red Harpy Hulk thing. Well, essentially, in Immortal Hulk issue 48, while Hulk was Joe Fixit, he and Betty as the Red Harpy got it on. She talked about how closed off Bruce is to her compared to the Joe Fixit persona, and even other personas of the Hulk. It's just so weird to me, and it almost feels like this is Betty cheating on Bruce, but it's really just two aspects of Betty and Bruce hooking up together. I don't know if it's cheating or not, but it's certainly strange.
Number 9, Miss Marvel and Vision. Captain Marvel and Vision are definitely a couple of the weirdest ones on this list. And we also happen to just be starting out, so it's not a good sign. Back in the day, Carol was not yet known as Captain Marvel and instead went by the name of Miss Marvel. This was before Kamala Khan came along and took up that mantle for herself after Carol had moved on from it, becoming Captain Marvel. Kamala inherited it, by the way, because she was just a massive Carol Danvers fangirl, which I kinda love. Before those days, however, there was the awkward date that happened between Carol as Miss Marvel and Vision. This was after Vision and Scarlet Witch had broken up, and I gotta say, I don't know who takes the cake for having more awkward dates between them, but in a weird way, it kind of makes sense that they'd get together and have an awkward date, considering that when I think of awkward superhero dates in Marvel Comics, both of these people come to mind for me for like folks who have had some of the most awkward date moments.
Number 8, Nightwing. This one is a little unique, not only because it breaks up a long-beloved relationship between Nightwing and his Teen Titans teammate Starfire, but also because the writers of the comics retcon things about multiple characters' histories that made no sense or kind of completely ruined the integrity of said characters. After deciding that Barbara Gordon is the perfect fit for Nightwing over Starfire, the beginning pages of Nightwing Annual No. 2 in 2007 gave us Nightwing confessing how absolutely madly in love he is with Barbara. The story then goes on to retcon their entire history, stating that they have been in love since the days when they were Batgirl and Robin, despite the weird age difference. And then, if that weren't weird enough, the book turns Dick Grayson into a cheater. Dick shows up the night before he's supposed to marry Starfire and spends the night with Babs. So he cheats on Corey, but then Dick also gives Babs an invitation to that wedding after just spending the night together, and she wasn't even aware that Dick was still planning to get married in the first place. Weird.
At number 7 are the Marvel Zombies. In the twisted Marvel Zombies universe, where heroes hunger for the flesh of the living, an unexpected and mind-boggling team unfolded. You see, Galactus, the cosmic devourer of worlds, was rendered into a grotesque figure, a far cry from his formidable 616 incarnation. You see, in this nightmarish reality, Galactus manifested as a corporeal being which is vulnerable to the insatiable appetites of the zombie Avengers. It's kind of weird because these undead mortals eventually feast upon a cosmic entity known for its indomitable might. While it's explained that the Galactus of Earth 2149 was crafted from flesh, a startling departure from what we're used to. Because as he's depicted in 616, Galactus' true form isn't a physical body, but rather abstract energy. The big dude in a funny suit we see is just what our minds can comprehend, like how Pennywise is actually a cosmic spider. So anyway, Mark Miller's zombie series introduced this shocking image of the zombies eating Galactus, leaving subsequent writers little choice but follow suit. As the zombie Avengers devoured Galactus, they unwittingly inherited his purpose, setting off a multiversal buffet until the cosmic meal dwindled and the cosmic power ran out, returning them to their ravenous roots. At number 6 are the Secret Six, a team once heralded as heroes back in the 60s, but slowly became an unexpected amalgamation of villainy that took the comic world by surprise. Unlike your run-of-the-mill baddie alliances, this group incorporated a diverse roster with Deadshot, Bane, and Harley Quinn, and even the notorious Joker claiming membership. But what's truly shocking is the mysterious puppeteer known as Mockingbird. It's like discovering that Batman has been secretly pulling the strings for the Joker all along. The revelation that the Riddler or Lex Luthor also had their hands in the mix is sort of like unearthing the Pandora's box of villainy. These unexpected team-ups redefine the very essence of villainy and heroism, demonstrating that in the realm of comics, the line between good and evil can blur in the most spine-chilling ways. Speaking of which, at number 5 is Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers. Spider-Man's most terrifying villain is allowed to form his own Avengers? Now that's scary. Following the Skrull invasion, Osborn seized control of S.H.I.E.L.D., manipulating them in the Thunderbolt to create his own sinister version of the Avengers under the guise of the Hammer Agency. What makes this alliance truly spine-chilling is the unsettling cast of heroes, quote-unquote, that Osborn assembled. Bullseye is posed as Hawkeye, Venom as Spider-Man, and Moonstone as Miss Marvel, each of them concealing their secretly malevolent intentions. Ares and Sentry, once heroes, found themselves tainted by their affiliation with Osborn's dark agenda. Yet, the most disturbing transformation lay in Daken, who assumed the mantle of Wolverine, and No-Varb, who became Captain Marvel. Norman himself adopted the Iron Patriot suit, twisting patriotism into something nightmarish. At number 4 is Magneto and Red Skull. In the convoluted tapestry of comic book alliances, the pairing of Red Skull and Magneto is nothing short of a paradoxical enigma. Two diametrically opposed figures, their shared history is a testament to the complexity in the Marvel Universe. Their initial encounter during the Acts of Vengeance storyline was marked by Magneto's seething contempt for the embodiment of the evil that Red Skull represents. This animosity is well-founded, considering Magneto's harrowing experiences during the event from World War II, which shall not be named. Yet, as the narrative threats of Marvel Comics tend to weave, we find Magneto standing shoulder to shoulder with the very antagonist he once despised. In Deadpool eliminates the Marvel Universe again, and in Old Man Logan, these universes both witnessed Magneto's unsettling alliance with Red Skull as they collaborated to further their nefarious ambition. This unlikely partnership serves as a testament to the ever-shifting alliances and allegiances and the moral ambiguities that define the Marvel Universe, where heroes and villains dance on a precarious tightrope of alliances and rivalry. At number 3, the Crime Master and Toxin. Let's take a look at the shocking collaboration between Flash Thompson, known as Agent Venom, and the notorious Crime Master during the Agent Venom storyline. See, at first glance, it seemed like an ordinary showdown between hero and villain, but beneath the surface, a sinister plot was unfolding. The Crime Master, the ever-cunning mastermind, developed a plan that transcended mere villainy. See, he coerced Eddie Brock, the former Venom, into joining his malevolent cause. However, his ambition didn't stop there. Using the formidable symbiote Toxin, the Crime Master forcibly merged it with Eddie, creating an unholy alliance. Together with the villains, they embarked on a campaign of terror, targeting not just Agent Venom, but also his loved one, revealing a level of malevolence that left readers in complete shock. At number 2 is Judge Joker. Now, the scariest villain team-ups often emerge when you least expect them, like when the Joker, infamous for his lack of superpowers, ventured beyond his universe. In the Batman/Judge Dredd's, Joker wields unimaginable powers after crossing into Judge Dredd's realm via a multiversal teleportation belt. He aids Judge Unalive, a malevolent entity seeking to annihilate all life across the multiverse. In return, Judge Unalive imparts sinister abilities upon Joker, transforming him into another dark judge. Joker's newfound power allows him to make heads explode with his laughter, a grotesque and quite fitting ability. Each dark judge gains powers tied to their obsessions, making Joker's lethal laughter a darkly logical choice. He becomes immortal in this form, impervious to harm. However, the Joker's return to his original self is a twist in itself. See, if he had retained these abilities, he'd be unstoppable amidst even DC's mightiest heroes. While it's disappointing for the Clown Prince of Crime, his cinematic presence would dwindle with these R-rated powers, a reminder that sometimes unexpected alliances lead to frankly horrifying outcomes. And at number 1 is the Injustice League. The Injustice League, a formidable gathering of DC's most notorious evildoers, is typically led by the brilliant Lex Luthor, featuring iconic antagonists like the Joker, Deathstroke, Black Manta, Cheetah, and Sinestro. The Injustice League is a force to be reckoned with. However, their effectiveness as a team pales in comparison to their individual endeavors, primarily due to the Justice League's seamless teamwork. Interestingly, for those seeking the Legion of Doom, think of it as a rebranding of the Injustice League. The Super Friends are essentially mirrored in the Justice League, sharing many members and embodying similar dynamics. And so much of what applies to the Injustice League also holds true for the Legion of Doom as well. That's a 2-in-1 for you.